The sound of rain against the courthouse roof felt almost deliberate, as though the sky itself wanted to listen. Inside Harrowgate's gray-brick Superior Court, the air was weighted by anticipation. It had taken nearly 17 years to arrive at this moment. 17 years since the night Adrian Vale became both victim and villain of his own invention. The reporters had arrived at dawn, setting up tripods and microphones like soldiers planting flags. Everyone knew what was coming, but they wanted to see it, to see the man who once fooled the world into thinking he was dead. At the defense table sat Adrian, silent. His expression was unreadable, as though carved from restraint itself. He had been many things in life: a youth advocate, a scholar, a fugitive, a patient, and finally, a man accused of a crime no one had been able to prove until now. The bailiff's voice cut through the air. "All rise." When the judge read the verdict, it was not dramatic, just final. The words rolled forward like a slow, cold tide, sentenced to a minimum of 5 years to life imprisonment. The courtroom didn't erupt, it exhaled. For the first time in a decade, the story of Adrian Vale was no longer rumor, it was history. Long before his name became tabloid currency, Adrian Vale was considered one of the brightest minds in Rhode Island. He had founded a youth organization, FutureBridge, promising rehabilitation for at-risk teens. Grants flowed in. Local politicians quoted his speeches. He seemed unstoppable. That was before the story shifted, from savior to suspect. Marianne Holt had been his girlfriend in college, a reserved literature student with a quiet intellect that balanced his charm. After graduation, they drifted apart until an alumni event in 2008. There, over wine and nostalgia, something happened that neither would ever fully agree upon. Marianne said he assaulted her. Adrian called it a misunderstanding twisted into accusation. But forensic evidence spoke its own language. In weeks, his reputation shattered. Community leader charged with sexual assault ran the headlines. FutureBridge lost its sponsors. And then, just when the trial loomed, Adrian Vale vanished. 2 days later, a body surfaced off Narragansett Bay, bloated and barely recognizable. His ID was in the jacket pocket. A coroner signed off the death certificate without question. The obituary was poetic, a light extinguished too soon. In Glasgow, 2020, a pandemic swept the world, and with it came strange miracles. Hospitals filled with the lost, the unclaimed, and the nameless. Among them was a man who called himself Arthur Knight, recovering from severe pneumonia. He spoke with an American accent, but claimed to be from Bristol. His wife, Lydia Knight, fiercely protected him, calling him a victim of mistaken identity. Yet his face, behind the oxygen mask, carried familiarity. When a nurse Googled missing American philanthropist, her hand froze on the screen. Investigators were discreet at first. They ran prints, then voice samples. Both returned a match. When officers arrived, the man raged. "I am Arthur Knight. I've never heard of Adrian Vale." But forensic truth doesn't argue. A ghost had been found breathing. When Adrian was extradited to the United States, the world rediscovered its appetite for spectacle. He was no longer the idealist from Providence. He was a man who had faked his own death, evaded the law, and invented an identity complete with fabricated degrees and forged medical files. But behind the arrogance was desperation. From prison, he wrote long letters proclaiming innocence, accusing governments of conspiracy and journalists of slander. Sarah Marin, a journalist for the Atlantic Beacon, began following his case. She wasn't interested in sensationalism. She wanted to know why someone would choose to erase themselves. Their first conversation was through a reinforced glass wall. "Why fake your death if you were innocent?" she asked. Adrian smiled faintly. "Because truth doesn't keep you alive. Disappearance does." She left that day unsettled, not by his guilt, but by how convincing his denial sounded. Weeks turned to months. Sarah kept visiting, piecing together fragments of the past. Adrian's old colleagues described him as brilliant yet manipulative. Former partners recalled his tendency to reinvent himself every few years. But it was Marianne Holt's statement that broke through the noise. She agreed to speak only once, and not on record. She didn't want fame or vindication, just peace. The worst part, she told Sarah, was not what happened that night. It was how easily he made the world believe he was the victim. When Sarah played that recording back in her apartment, she understood what she'd been chasing wasn't a mystery. It was a mirror of human denial. Still, something in her refused to hate him. Maybe it was pity. Maybe fascination. The trial began 2 years later. Courtrooms, like theaters, thrive on audience attention, and this one sold out daily. Adrian represented himself for part of the trial, challenging witnesses, turning cross-examination into performance. He spoke eloquently, weaving doubt into every statement. His wife Lydia sat in the front row, whispering prayers. But then came the evidence. Forensic DNA, matched beyond question. The jury's posture changed. When the prosecution displayed his forged death certificate and the doctored emails proving premeditation, silence swallowed the room. Adrian watched with an odd calm, as though fascinated by his own destruction. The sentencing came on a gray November morning. Sarah attended, sitting quietly in the back. She no longer needed to write the story. The story had already written itself. When the judge asked if Adrian had anything to say, he rose, slow and deliberate. He looked at the jury, then at Marianne, then at Sarah. "I never wanted to be famous," he said softly. "I only wanted to be believed." The gavel struck once. The noise echoed like thunder. Outside, Sarah stepped into the rain, unsure whether she'd witnessed justice or tragedy, or both. Adrian Vale was led away, head high, his myth finally stripped down to human frailty. Months later, the world moved on. The tabloids found new scandals, the public found new villains. But in her office, Sarah still kept one photograph pinned to the board. The one taken of Adrian during his charity years, when he was still the man everyone wanted to believe in. She wrote the final line of her feature that night. "Some lies are told to escape guilt, others to escape grief. But the worst kind are told so often that even the liar forgets where the truth began." Somewhere in a state prison, Adrian Vale rehearsed that same line in his mind, as if it belonged to him.